Now let's talk about the nose. Now, each feature has its own problem. And I'd mentioned some of this with the eye, but it was weeks ago, so it bears repeating, and maybe I didn't mention it. We've got the head, the big landscape, and then the features are their own structures on the greater structure. So we got the bigger acreage, the bigger landscape of the head. The face is where most of the features, except for one, are. And so we've got to get the structure of the head and then the structure of the features on it. So think landscape and then specific terrain, little mountains and valleys on that bigger continent, that bigger acreage. So that's the idea. Each area that we draw, no matter how small, how big, it could be multi-figures, is going to have both an energy and a structure to it, energy and matter, gesture and structure. And so we're constantly trying to find how we flow over and through things so it has that sense of life and immediacy. And I picked Hans Holbein to start off with here because he's one of the great draftsmen in human history, especially portrait work, and that's almost all he did. And his stuff looks, even though it was way back in kind of the Baroque period there, he still looks modern, still has modern sensibilities somehow. It's amazing. So anyway, we'll look at those beautifully crafted work. But each time we look at whatever it is, no matter how small, we want to think of the energy, and you can think of the energy as a feeling of action or a feeling of connection. It can also have some deeper meaning, the momentum of life, the drama of life, the page turner in a novel, the rhythm underneath each note and chord of a song. It's what ties together and propels us through. And oftentimes that's through visually and emotionally. So gesture is important. And then the structure, each particular little thing or bigger thing or composition of several things, how they actually occupy space, their character, their design, their position. The gesture has one more idea that's important, and particularly on the features, because it's so easy to isolate the eyelid around the eyeball and then stick that onto the eye socket, onto the head and face. What we want in any structure that we're drawing, say the knuckle of the hand, we want to feel that structure. And then we want what I call an out, as in and out, O-U-T, out. We want to be able to feel, we want the eye of our audience to move over that form structurally, move across that structure rhythmically, energetically, and then flow out into the next thing. So think of an eddy that locks in and creates this little swirl of water and then sweeps back out, the leaf in the eddy maybe, and then rejoins the greater river of energy. So each time we understand the structure of the feature, in this case the nose, that's not going to do us any good if we don't feel the greater structure it's on. And that's not going to feel correct, any of it, if we can't feel like we can flow from the nose to the face and from the face to the head and from the head to the neck and from this figure to that figure. So we've got several challenges to attack. And also on the nose, take a look at this. There we go. You can see me in there as well, so that's good. Notice when we look at the nose, we have a very particular problem. It's actually the problem we have everywhere for the most part, but it's very apparent in the nose, and it's easy, if we don't solve these problems, for the nose to stick out like a sore nose, I guess, which is kind of a funny concept. I just thought of that instead of a sore thumb. That was the joke there. I'm glad that was recorded. So anyway, when we look at the nose straight on, it's contained into, I'll look at the camera rather than myself, it's contained in the silhouette here. When we get to a profile of it, which way are we going? Yep, profile, I did it right. Profile of it, like in the Holbein, we notice that the nose is going in a different direction than the face. One of the reasons I picked Holbein is he does these Northern Europeans with very big noses. So when we've got that nose, it's actually breaking the plane and coming out from the face. The face is going down, and it could do all sorts of things, but whatever it's doing, the nose is going in its own perspective, own direction. Even though it's attached, it extends out. So when we get here, how do we get that to extend out when it's locked in? We can understand that break much better when we're in silhouette, can't we? When we're in silhouette, we know that we can see the structure and the separation of things. When it's in some more confusing position, we lose a lot of those visual clues. And now how are we going to know the fingers are long? How's our audience going to know that? It becomes a real problem. So the nose, we have some of that problem too. And as we then move that head into position, somebody just tuning in is going to wonder what the heck I'm doing. The perspective of the nose is going to change at a greater rate than the face. The face is getting foreshortened, but the nose is getting really foreshortened. So if I go here, we're tipping back that head a little bit with the fisheye camera. It looks like more extreme, but in real eyesight, it's just a little tip back, but we've lost almost all of the length of the nose. If I go there, it's all gone. All of a sudden, the nose that was way down at the bottom of the ears is now up in alignment with the eye line. That's a problem we have to solve. And when we go this way, we have a very particular problem in the nose, which is always the problem, but we don't think of it oftentimes. I'm seeing this half of the nose, my left, in real world terms, but we're not seeing the right side. It's gone. You're seeing the front of the hand, you're not seeing the back. You're seeing the top of the head, you're not seeing probably the bottom. So the best we'll see of any particular form we're drawing is probably half of it. Here's my vitamins. We're not getting to see the other half. One of the things that will help us is symmetry. If I can't see this eye or all this eye, I know there's another eye, and it's probably relatively symmetrical, give or take a Spock raised eyebrow or something like that. So we have several problems here. We need to, when we have something silhouetted, we need to give a sense of its full structure coming in and out of the paper when there's no visual clues there in terms of contour. Well, that's not quite true. In terms of silhouette. If I silhouette the nose completely, it's going to look flatter and flatter and flatter. The more I outline it, the worse I get. If I get over here, that problem is largely solved. I just have to practice not sticking it out too far, wobbling it down as it wobbles, going at the right angle, making it the right length. We have fairly straightforward problems we can start to solve. But when we get the silhouette of things, we're only seeing half of that. And because it's silhouetted in profile, it's cut. The most important symmetry idea is completely gone. We're only seeing half of the symmetrical whole. So it creates all these challenges that we have to deal with. And then on top of that, we don't really want to silhouette things out anyway because we want an out. We want to describe this structure fully in volume, probably, if we're realists, and yet how it reintegrates. So think of Nessie, Loch Ness Monster. That back comes up and surfaces, and we see it separate from the water, realize it's something alive, and then it submerges back down. That's what we want in most of these things, unless there's just straight out separation of one thing on top and blocking the other. But usually things are integrated. So when you look at these beautiful Holbeins here, look at how subtle they are, and yet they're describing all of the problems with beautiful solutions. All those problems I just brought out, he's creating beautiful solutions. So as the weeks go on, we'll try and describe how to solve those problems and find beautiful solutions ourselves. So with that in mind, let's switch to my desktop camera. That's not my desktop camera. My overhead camera, that's what I want. And let's draw a little bit. So here we have the Holbein. And we have a bunch of them, and they're really beautiful. These are not fantastic reproductions, but they're good enough for what we're doing, and they're nice and big. I had another book out, but they're they were a little small and a little soft in printing. These are a little contrasty, a little Xeroxy, but good enough for what we're doing. So let's start with some basic ideas. So if I've got a simple, and my metric for success here is whatever I draw, I want to make it as simple as possible. Let me get a little more robust tool. Make it as simple as I can so it's something I can achieve without beating myself up, without it being an overwhelming problem. A simple, what I like to call a little win. Have little challenges. The best in the world actually only put out 4% of a challenge. I can do this 100% at my skill level. This is my baseline skill of skiing the slope, jumping on the trampoline, whatever. Now I'm going to attempt something just out of reach. I'm going to go 4% faster down the slope. I'm going to jump 4% higher off the mat, off the trampoline mat. Something that I can fairly quickly achieve. 2% is boring, 6% or more is overwhelming. We want to find that sweet spot. So your job, if you want to maximize how good you get at your craft over time, and we folks can get really good, we humans, we're somewhat unlimited in what we can achieve. It's amazing. Let me get that out of the way. If we do it right, if we can sustain our interests and our motivation without getting overwhelmed or bored. So a little win is a challenge that we can realize, even though it's given us a little bit of trouble right now, very quickly that will become my new baseline. So I'm going to start with a simple head. And what I want to do then with that little wins at 4%, I want to make it as simple as I possibly can. And yet, as characteristic as I can. As simple as I can, as characteristic as I can. The balance. They're extremes. Simple, well, that'd be a simple head. But there's not much more I could do with that. Make sure it's on camera, yep. And make sure you guys are seeing me good. Okay. Really simple, not particularly characteristic. Can't do much with that. Can't turn that into a 3-hour rendering or a beautiful painting maybe. And as characteristic as possible, be photorealistic. Every nuanced detail. So I want to find the sweet spot. As characteristic, as close to the truth of what I see, and that might be a realistic measurement, or it might be some personal artistic idea, hence different art styles. But as real as it can, and yet as truthful as it can be, and yet as simple as it can be. So I can get it down quick, so I can change my mind, so I can iterate and practice over and over for deep practice to level up quicker, all these kind of things. So I want to kind of come up with something that's really simple, and then but relatively characteristic. Sometimes I need to see it in relationship to something else. A few simple things to make sure I've got it right. Sometimes I need to make it a little more or even a lot more characteristic by making it not quite as simple. And I want to practice that. Do that often so that I've got a fine eye. When we're practicing, when we're getting better at something, if it's any kind of physical activity, playing the piano, hitting a baseball, kicking a soccer ball, whatever it is, we have two things. We need to wire up our skill so that the brain sends little messages to the muscles and they do that act, which is usually millions of pathways to swing a bat, to draw a little, even a simple almond eye, to wire that in so that the tool, in this case the hand and the Sharpie, will do what the brain and the eye want it to do. But the other metric that's just as important, in some ways in the beginning more important, is training the eye itself. We need to learn to see, because we come out of the womb not seeing very well, not seeing actually the fact that we are separated from the world itself. We think we're connected to the world because we always were in the womb, or we always were in the heavenly beginnings of our soul, or whatever our beliefs or practical biology is around that. We were connected and not disconnected. We come into this world of disconnection, and we have to learn that as babies. We have to learn that we're separated. And then what happens as maturity and biology develop, we learn to see silhouettes. And really only silhouettes. I mean, think about it. You've looked at faces, you've looked at noses all your life. Some of you, 6, 7 decades maybe. And yet, without extensive practice, you can't do a good job drawing them. What's up with that? You know them. I mean, you look at your face in the mirror several times a day, brushing your teeth, combing your hair, all that kind of stuff. And yet you can't draw even a simplified version of that. And that's because we're taught to see the silhouettes. We look at the hackles on the back of the wolf and the silhouette of the teeth against the curled back lips. And that's all the biology wants to know. The silhouette of those things says, stay away. We see the head down, the ears back, and the tail wagging. We see that's safe. We don't have to worry about it. And the biology doesn't want to know anything else. So when I'm waving at the camera like you can see me, doesn't know anything else. So we need to learn as artists to get past the silhouette and see what's inside. To feel form, we have to be able to move over the form. And we need to be able to get the audience to move over the form. And that's the beautiful invention of construction lines, is it teaches us how to begin to see it when we couldn't see it before, and how to describe at least the idea of it, even if it's not the illusion yet of it. So training your eye to actually see like an artist is a very different technique, very different skill set than seeing like a survivalist, seeing like a biological unit that's looking for opportunities to steal calories and looking for danger of something that's going to try and steal all of our calories back. So that's the problem. So it takes a while. So when you're learning to draw the head and you're very new at it, cut yourself a break. The eye needs to develop. Just like if I'm learning to play the guitar and I can't play the guitar, it takes me a while for my big fingers to be able to pluck the right little string. And then my big fingers to coordinate in such a way that they all touch on that each separate string in the way that I can make a chord. That's a real skill. And I'm not going to make any apparent progress for the first 2-3 hours or whatever it is, 5-6 hours, whatever it is. It'll feel like wasted time, and that's where most people give up. But with a little bit of practice, we learn to make that biology react correctly, and the fingers start to learn the position and the pressure. The eyes start to see the volume, the movement over the form, and eventually the movement between the form, kind of thing. It takes a while, so give yourself a break, and then you'll make real progress once you go through that kind of feeling like nothing's happening, period. So trust that. So all that's to say, we want to find the position of the nose before we start to deal with the construction of the nose. So symmetry, bilateral symmetry helps beautifully. What's over here is more or less equal to what's over there. And so we can use construction lines. And as soon as we move the position of those construction lines, we start to get an understanding of where the stuff sits, even if we don't understand exactly how to draw that stuff and differentiate it. So that takes a while. And as we start to do this, maybe Several hours later, we realize, oh, that worked really well for placing the features, even though it's kind of crude. Maybe that should go there. Maybe this should be a little bit shorter, whatever. We start to differentiate by making it simple yet characteristic and judging it. Simple and yet characteristic and judging it. Could be more characteristic. There should be a little bit more back of the head, and so on. What we'll find is if we cut a typical head in half, one half here, one half here, and I usually make a little bit more here for a stronger jaw, even on females oftentimes, but some people do the reverse, and if it was a child, you would do the reverse. But somewhere around the halfway point, top of the head without the hairstyle, bottom of the chin without an open jaw. That's going to be the eye line, kind of cuts through where the upper and lower lids sit. And what's here is over there. So this should be about the same distance away from that. That should be about the same distance away from that. Those should be pretty close together. So that means I want to move my center line over there if I don't want to move my eyes. This shouldn't be so high. It should be a little low. As I practice this over and over and over again, it'll get better. And these little things that are asymmetrical will start to even out. And you'll get an ever more refined set of skills and an ever better eye for judging the truth of what you're putting down. Oftentimes you'll add several things together before you're confident of the truth of any one thing. And if I can make it simple yet characteristic, that simplicity speeds me through. I get a lot of practice, repetition and immersion with just a couple problems. I just want the position and proportions of something really simple, an egg, not even a three-dimensional egg maybe a two-dimensional egg. I'm going to repeat that until that little win becomes my new baseline, or I get to a certain level of competence. I feel good, and I'm not master yet at it, but I'm much better. Now I can move on to something else. And then we keep immersing in a small challenge or small set of challenge, try and get a simple solution so I can repeat that quickly, see the truth of those just few marks in relationship to each other, and yet still having a sense as my eyes develop of seeing how that could turn into something very, very sophisticated. So see how that loop happens? Looking at a problem, thinking of it as something that's a challenge. I feel confident in a little bit of time I can meet and overcome. Do that by simplification, making it ever more characteristic. This is a little more characteristic head of that maybe, so that it gets ever more true. I refine my truth like clay. Get a big blob, turn it into an egg or a capsule shape, dig out the eye sockets, build a little wedge of the nose, carve out the cheeks, and slowly by adding and taking away clay, it becomes ever more refined and ever more truthful, ever closer to my goals. Once we've got this kind of halfway point, we could also think of it in thirds, from not the top of the head, but the hairline usually, down to the eyebrow, 1/3. From the eyebrow to the nose, 1/3. From the nose to the chin, 1/3. Again, if you're doing something more heroic or idealized, maybe a little bit more. And then you can play with that. If it's a werewolf, maybe a guy turned into a werewolf, maybe the hairline's lower and it's far less than 1/3, and the nose, the snout's growing, and so it's more, and you can play with those proportions. But the nose is going to sit somewhere in there. The other way to think of it, if you got decent sized ears, but not super big or super small, the nose is oftentimes very close to the bottom of the ear there. Again, I'm trying to point to the camera with my own ear, and that's not going to work, is it? And the top of the ears are usually usually it starts to get a little big if they're all the way up to the eyebrow line. Usually they're a little smaller than that, as I did here. but the ears are going to sit usually somewhere between the eyebrow line and the nose line, and usually be a little less than that. But you'll look at the particular model and see if that's true. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it may not be true. A lot of these hairstyles and hats are covering ears, so that's not so helpful, is it? So the nose sits in there. So that's number one. How are we doing on time? Not great. We're running out of time, so let's move on. So if I can understand the position of that particular thing I want to draw, start to understand the position of it and the proportions of it compared to the bigger landscape it rests on, first two-dimensionally and then eventually three-dimensionally. First, in terms of simple shapes, and you can see how he conceived of this as a simple shape. You can see here where this is vignetted out, it's all shape. He hasn't made any pretense of showing the form. Start out with two-dimensional shapes, which is simpler than three-dimensional form. Don't have to worry about that in and out of the paper problem. Find its position on the bigger thing, the face or the head. The proportions of it. We found a couple ways to look at the proportions on there. And then we can slowly add more characteristic ideas. Adding shadow will be more characteristic to the form. Adding soft gradations, more tone, less line, will be more characteristic of real. We can design that any way you want. Here you can see he played with more real, very subtle rendering, a little more expressionistic. This is kind of thick, painterly lines, and more linear, almost cartoony in some of his drawings in terms of how he does the environment. This is almost a cartoon kind of hair, so he's adding ink over the charcoal. So you can make it ever more characteristic on top of that. So that's the basic process. And then we want to feel how the nose sits on the face. So if we go now to a profile, again, we'll notice that the plane of the face, without all the bulging and binding features, plane of the face, simplified like a sculpture before we'd added the stair steps of clay, is in a different direction than the nose. So we want to get a sense of that. And what we'll find if we go back to our front view again, if we look between the hair of the eyebrow, unless you have a unibrow there, which happens, but you'll feel a little section in here, and it's right here. It's where the forehead bumps back or rolls back, and then there's a transition, falls back in, like the wave sucking in, and then it rushes back out. So that's going to be the anchor, the place where you can think of it kind of like a delta shape. Little in there, really like this, since we're going to add the nose. But that's going to be the transition where the forehead ends and the nose begins. That's a great landmark. It's very similar to the pit of the neck, where the throat ends, the alignment of the face ends, depending on the dynamic pose. It's a landmark where we can connect the shoulder girdle and so the arms to the torso. It's a landmark where we've got the breastbone, where we can get the symmetry and the gesture line of the torso down towards the crotch. So it's a key landmark. Same here. It separates the eyebrows, just like this separates the shoulders. It ends the nose, shows the symmetry of the whole face, and so it will show its relationship then to the symmetry, in this case, the dynamic symmetry to the throat. And it's the beginning of not the breastbone sternum, but the bridge of the nose. So a really important landmark. It's going to help tie everything together. And then we learn from doing the head, the eye, that we want this stepping back from brow to eyeball, setting in safely protected in the eye socket. So we have this stepping back going on. Stepping back going on. This is a different kind of stepping back to the barrel of the mouth. We'll look at that connection together with the mouth. But this has a subtle stepping back that actually mimics stepping back to the eyeball in that eye socket, protected. By the cheekbone below, the brow ridge above. The eyeball sits in here, stepping back, and that's mimicked where we come back off the brow to the root of the nose, the nasal bone, the nasal cavity, to begin that. So we want to find that landmark. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time just working on the simple construction of the head with the center line and the eye and or eyebrow line. I like to do both because then you can get the thirds up and also use the eye line to get that half, more or less. And then that's going to be the foundation of placing that smaller structure on the bigger landscape. And then what we'll find is that the nose is stepping forward. It's a wedge that sits on that bigger landscape of the cheeks. And the cheeks are going to have a plane, an alignment of their planes together, the symmetry of the cheek, and then the nose is going to step on top of that one way or another. We have to feel that bumping out. If it's in a profile, it's going to bump out for us. There's that step back, step forward. Here's that step back, and then step forward for the cheekbone that's not really shown here. It's so subtle. Okay, so let's stop there. I'll take a look real quick, see if we have any questions on that. But that would be something I would work with a lot. I would sketch over artist's work, see if I can find, look at how austere, beautifully designed, how minimalist it is. One of the things that makes it modern. Incredible restraint in the tones, even though they're very descriptive of structure. We'll talk about this one another time probably to show how much is being shown there with almost nothing in terms of marks at a glance. So I'd be working with that, trying to find these structural ideas on all these wonderful pieces of art or all this wonderful photo reference, or having that mirror and looking at your own wonderful face. All right, so let's hop back here, there. Is there any quick, thanks, Gustav, that's sweet. Any quick questions around that? And as you're thinking of that, because we're on delay, let me just mention, because I didn't do it before, if you love these live streams, I'm going to keep doing them. I love doing them. It's so much fun hanging out with artists. And it's so much fun getting to talk about art, and so getting better at it as we talk about it and doing a little practice and actually doing it. So that's fun. So we'll keep doing that, but spread the wealth. Let people know about it. Tell a few friends about it. Maybe share a post. I post every day of on all the different social sites. Didn't do it on Threads today. I forgot to do it. But follow along and share it out. Let people know. You'd be doing me a favor, and hopefully you're doing them a favor as well. And the more the merrier with this. We want a community of support. We feed on community. It makes us feel safe. We're smarter together. We're more creative together than we are apart. It's important. So if you can help me build that, I would be eternally grateful to you. And then if you are interested, these lives are posted over on the Patreon channel. I put all the photo reference and usually 2 or 3 more, usually 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 or 8 photo references, but usually 4 to 6 of them on there with some homework. They're posted. You can go through that. There's probably 50 some live streams, and some of those are pulled from the library of my clients, my high-ticket clients that work with me one-on-one and with my coaches and group and one-on-one situations. So there's some real value there to work with, and the recording, it's the magic of the internet. It's recorded, it's there forever. We can go back to it forever and ever. Remember what I said, leveling up is about the skill, wiring the brain so that it tells this what to do and this can do it. And then wiring the eyes, the experience of separating from that biological way of seeing just the silhouette like a shadow on the wall and feeling the full volume and character and feel the energy of connection, the flow, the outs from this to that. Getting to a point where you can actually see what's up there, and then the point where you can actually see what's up there and get it down here, and then eventually, in my mind, getting to the point where you can see what's up there, get it down here, and remake it on some level, maybe just 4%, into something that's personally you and not completely that. So now it goes from here to here, and that's where art's most powerful. That takes time and attention. So I've got the free content, I've got the Patreon, it's only $8 a month, and then I've got the high ticket stuff that you can ask about. Drop me a line on any of the social media areas, and if you're interested, ask about it, and we'll tell you about it.